Board games, board games. We might be talking about board games and card games, but we're not gonna shout. Some games are kind of old. I mean, not thousands of years, just, from 30 years ago. And this game has been done by many publishers, by which I really mean there's only two others. But anyway, Mike Dodd's going to tell us what's what about VTES. And that's the game that's not the topic of today's show. um, yes, enough of my terrible rhyming and lyrics, but today is 10 a.m. UK time. Saturday, the 14th of January. Betty Beats and Board Game Leader, thank you for joining us, Mike Nudd, where we're going to be talking about what is Vampire's Eternal Struggle. Of course, relevant to the chat, you are the lead designer of Fall of London, and you've been a very big part of the community generally for quite a few years, and I'd like to chat about that, but I'd like to also go back a little bit, talk about what is this game, a little bit about how it plays, but why does it attract so much love and attention? Why has it gone through like three different, well, two major publishers, Wizards of the Coast, White Wolf Publishing, and then been resurrected by other people? Why has it managed to attract all of this? And what lessons are there from a design and game creation and game playing point of view? So thank you for joining me, Mike Nudd.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks for all the questions. Yeah, they're interesting questions. Where to start? Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Well, the original game was by Richard Garfield. It was one of the games that the Wizards of the Coast produced straight after Magic: The Gathering, based on the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game produced by White Wolf, another American company, very popular back in the 90s. And actually, it's the proposition's madness, really. I mean, if you said today, "Hey, let's make a multiplayer-only card game based on a very specific IP," you wouldn't think that it would go anywhere. But yeah, it was pretty successful. I mean, the original game actually was called Jihad. It wasn't called Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, which they did change that pretty quickly because they realised that was a bit
a bit problematic for a number of reasons.
Very problematic, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't random. I mean, in the world of Vampire the Masquerade, the idea is that there are these very old vampires that kind of are in the shadows somewhere, or even sleeping in tombs somewhere, that through their supernatural abilities are still manipulating their minions and their descendants in this kind of like great political chess game around the world, which in the role-play game is called the Jihad. That's kind of what they called it originally, which is where that name came from. But yeah, Vampire the Eternal Struggle is a much more palatable name. But essentially, the card game represents that shadowy political struggle that you, the player yourself, you take on the role of one of those ancient sleeping Methuselahs, fighting for control of the world, and you do that through your minions. I mean, the picture you just got on there, those are little vampire cards, and those are when you build your deck, because it is a constructible game. It used to be collectible in the same way that Magic and many other games were. You would build your own deck from your supply of cards, and there would be two components to your deck. One part would be your crypt, which would contain these vampire cards, and you would choose which vampires you wanted to put into that crypt. And then you would also have your library as a separate batch of cards, which would be like all of the powers and effects and equipment and locations and other things that might come up, that you might be able to use in that battle as well.
And so you've given an idea of the flavor, and vampires are a big part of our social consciousness. I mean, they're one of the all-time tropes, up there with zombies, and I mean, frankly, they are the big two, like vampires and zombies, the undead. And I think that when we look at the things that actually stare at us, it's almost like the husk of humanity. The things that we felt are kindred have all gone. And it's almost the urges, those base urges, with all the compassion and everything removed. Like some people might say that vampires are almost a way of looking within our own soul, if you know what I mean. But looking at the game, obviously talking about how it is mechanically, you said yourself, it's a deck construction game. Used to be a collectible cards game. It was the second, sorry, the third release from Richard Garfield, I believe. The first being Magic the Gathering, because it was interestingly cheaper to consider cheaper to print. Then Robo Rally was the second one, which was the first one pitched, and then third was Vampire the Eternal Struggle, which was my understanding, even though I've not played it, is it's basically felt from the ground up to be a multiplayer thing where whereas Magic the Gathering, it has evolved into all these formats, Commander and all these other things. It was always meant as a two-player person versus person game. And Vampire the Eternal Struggle, it's got all of these aspects really baked in. And you're making your deck, you sit down with a bunch of other people, and could you give us a very quick mechanical overview of what you'll be doing once you sit down at a table with a bunch of four? How many players would you normally choose to play with?
The optimal number of players for VTES, as we call it, is five. That's really the best number to play with, and that's primarily how it distinguishes itself from many other card games, because the idea is you don't play it one on one. That's not how you play it. It is a multiplayer game. You would play with at least three, even under kind of friendly kind of social conditions. You would play with at least three people. I used to play Magic too. I used to have a bunch of Magic cards. I mean, it's a very respectable game. I did sell most of mine for quite a bit of money back quite a long time ago. Kind of discovered it at Gen Con UK, but then switched from Magic to playing mostly VTES instead when VTES came out afterwards. In Magic, it is specifically a two-player game, one-on-one. It is a duel, it is a contest, and it is fundamentally about how well you build your deck and how well you play your cards. There's not a lot of room for kind of negotiation for kind of surprises to happen when you're playing head to head like that. I mean, Magic
Yeah.
you can play multiplayer, but what tends to happen is it's like pick on the leader, like, oh, they've got the most life and we're doing really badly, so everyone attack them, and it just goes around and round and round. Okay, now they're winning, let's all attack them, and it can go on for ages without a lot of structure and without feeling like you're getting very far.
And some
Um,
people have created other formats, like you only attack in one direction, or the star
yeah.
formats, we've got two
Oh,
opponents and two allies. But
yeah.
that's all kind of being shoehorned in, whereas
But
VTES was created from the ground up.
Yeah, but that direction thing I think came from VTES, because that is a core mechanic. If I sit down on a table and then there are five of us playing, person to my left is my prey, the person that I need to attack, and is the person that I need to remove from the game to score a point, and the person to my right is the person who's doing that to me. So I've got to defend this way, attack that way. The other two people on the table at the beginning of the game are completely neutral. Like I'm agnostic in terms of how we interact, and there's not actually that many ways for us to interact directly. But what we can do is over the table is discuss, well, I'm going to do this to this guy this turn. Maybe you can help me with this, or maybe where something goes badly, and then you can give me some resources
Because in
back
a
or
big
rescue
enough
my
game,
vampires.
the
Um,
person to cross is kind of your ally because you've got this
Exactly,
shared
yeah.
enemy
They
between.
can be your allies, but you have to negotiate that.
Mm-mm.
And any agreements you make are usually always temporary, but often very, very helpful. But I'm trying to negotiate with these two, but then the person to my left is trying to negotiate with these two, and so there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of there's like this other elements of the game that happens over the table that isn't really based on what your cards are at all. It's just based on how you reading the kind of like the table and the game state as it is in the moment, and then trying to capitalize on that, and actually to an extent even manipulating the players on the table into like you can bluff in terms of what you've got in your hand or what you're planning. You can completely lie. You can you can make up any old stuff and try and get people to believe it. And actually, that's quite a common thing, is to kind of pretend that you're weak. You're like, oh, I've got a really bad hand of cards, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm probably going to lose. Don't attack me. Like that. There's a lot of that goes on, but actually, that's not true at all. You're just waiting for the right moment to strike. you just need a bit of breathing room to be able to do that. And so it's really unique, not just from Magic, but from most other card games in that way. That how you read the table and how you play the players is quite unique, and it's more like poker, in fact, in that respect. And so it attracts a very unique audience, I guess, as a result of that too. Players who have social skills, who are interested in that social component to the game. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, Garfield has said in the past that any game, high interaction games with more than 2 players, is going to come down primarily to the politics, to the table talk, to the negotiation. Would you agree with that? Yep. And I think before we get too much more into all of this, I would like to take a tiny step back.
Sure.
Because at the start of every show, I like to talk quickly about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. So, Mike, what have been some of the things you've been up to in the past few days, and what's been the last game you played?
What I've been up to? Well, I've been working because I have a day job that's in IT, and that's not really anything to do with gaming at all. I have been building my Lego sort of Star Wars land speeder is something I've been doing, which I need to finish doing this weekend. I have been working on different game ideas. So in my spare time, I'm always trying to squeeze in, trying to push different projects forwards. I'm actually working on another Vampire the Masquerade board game at the moment, so I'm not sure I'm supposed to officially announce who it is or what it is yet, but that's something else that I'm doing right now. And I've got a couple of projects to do for Alley Cat Games as well that I need to be getting on with. So
exciting. And yep. Mike Nudd is a person in demand.
Well, my time is very much in demand. Yeah, it can be. It is quite difficult to. Well, it is quite difficult to do this some part time in your spare time. But yeah,
I was at Royal Festival Hall yesterday, playing with what might be called heartstrings. This person in the background suggested that name. I really like it. It's about manifesting physical connections between people to represent the connections that you've gathered through shared loves. And eventually you bring in some scissors, which are a manifestation of the kind of deterioration of those connections, I guess.
Cool, interesting. If you physically cut the string, I imagine you could only play it so many times, though, right? Without getting a new string.
It's more of an event game. It's designed specifically for Now Play This as something where, yes, it is kind of wasteful, but wool can be recycled, and I'm going to make sure to recycle all the wool. And it's an event game, and realistically, I expect people to play it just once and have all these beautiful memories with each other. This is a cooperative game that we also had time to try out called Questable. And of course, there's lots of other games from other designers. A real-time matching game, something about semi-cooperative movement, a push your luck game, and of course, something a bit more involved from Sebastian Bleasdale. At the end of the day, quite often, we all want to play a published game together. That's what we've started doing. So officially, it finishes at 4:45, and people are happy to skedaddle. But about the end of November, we started saying, well, I've got lots of unplayed games, and it would be useful to designers to play a whole bunch of other games. And also, we enjoy playing games. That's what brought us into wanting to make games in the first place. And it would be nice to get to know each other a bit. So whilst they finished Sebastian's game, I solo tested Questable a bit more, and we played this beautiful game called Shamans Have you heard of it?
I have not. Yeah, those card backs do look quite cool.
They are not card backs, they're the card
Uh,
fronts.
Card
So
front. Sorry.
this big symbol is the suit, and there's a little number showing the. It's a trick-taking game. You
Hmm.
don't have to follow suit. If you don't follow suit, then everyone loses a little bit of light. And most people are the shamans who want the game to stay in light, but then one person is playing the part of the shadows, and so you will just play off suits just for the sake of it, just because you can. And then there's special effects. When the sixth card of a particular suit is played, you'll be able to kill someone and eliminate them from the round, or potentially move the light counter or do something else. And people have to decide, that's clearly the shadow. They're trying to put us into darkness. We're going to kill them. If you kill someone and they are the shadow, then like basically you've killed all the shadows, everyone else wins points.
Okay.
Otherwise, if the shadow manages to kill someone who's a shaman, then there's a really interesting mechanism where the number of cards you have remaining in your hand is how many marks it will move towards the darkness. So if you're eliminated right at the start, which is kind of unlikely, it'll probably be enough cards to take you all the way into darkness. So even though it's ostensibly player elimination, in reality, it was never more than literally one more card being played before the game reset. And typically that would end the game right there. So I wouldn't really call it a player elimination game as a key feature. And it's a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of, hey, how many cards do you have? So I want to play this. And if you tell me honestly, then we can work together. But then maybe you don't want to say because at some point your role might be revealed or someone might even force you to switch.
Sure. Well, I imagine as a shadow player, you want to be quite covert about what you're doing and not
Mhm.
too obvious, at least in the early game. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you keep playing multiple rounds. Each round you get maybe 2 points, and then you're playing like 4 or 5 rounds until someone gets to it. But
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
really fascinating web of intrigue, and it's just reminding us of games at their core are mechanical possibilities that incentivize behavior and they incentivize us to play differently. And I think that that's a core part of any game. And this brings us back to VTES. And what is it about the rules that forces you to behave differently? What is it about VTES that encourages you to have an interesting time? That's such a brilliant thing. Brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant?
Well, I think it's kind of what we've spoken about and what you just touched on there as well. It's about drawing out the player behavior. I mean, there are like regular like Euro style board games. It's much more of a mental process of you plan. You kind of resource manage, you execute, score points, and you're done. But you can do that in silence. You can do that, chatting with your friends, and you can do it while you're role playing whoever you are. But how you behave around the table doesn't really matter. I mean, other than how you execute your turns and your actions. Where there is this subclass of games where how you behave as a human in your role in the game really matters. And like and that card game you just mentioned is one example, and yeah, VTES is another. I'm very much a fan of these games where you have this more nebulous, this more social component to it. Where am I a good guy? Am I a bad guy? Am I strong? Am I weak? Am I ready to strike? Am I on
But
the
in
verge of
VTES,
collapse?
your affordances are fairly clear. I mean, it's not like there's any hidden rules or hidden objectives or anything like that. I mean,
No, not in the same way as something like Bang or
or even Netrunner, where you've got like three
yeah,
piles and you're kind of
yeah. Well,
bluffing which pile is the main
Netrunner
player.
is the asymmetry in your roles is called out, but what you're playing as the corp is secret until as the runner you reveal it. So in VTES, the only secrets are, you know, what's in it, what's yet to be revealed in your crypt, and what's yet to be revealed in your hand. But from turn to turn, everyone's always thinking, is my prey weak? Is my prey strong? Is my prey able to react, able to block what I'm doing? One of the key mechanical things that happens in the game is, like we spoke before about how you get your vampire minions out in play, and that they sort of represent you in the game. Each turn, each of your minions can take actions, and there are a variety of different actions they can take. Which is attack your prey is a basic one. Hunt for more blood is another one. Play some equipment or whatever from your hand is another thing they can do. But all of those different actions have the potential to be blocked by the people either side of you. And there's this process of, well, I'm doing this, and you kind of rotate your, what we call now lock. You lock your vampire minion when they take the action to represent they've taken a turn. You lock them, and then let's say I'm attacking my prey. My prey's got some available minions, and they lock in response and say, okay, well, this guy is blocking that guy, so now that they fight. But what you can then do is you can play some stealth, and you go, haha, I've got some stealth in my hand. And now they're being stealthy, and your opponent then has to play sort of intercept in
So
response.
is the key part that every card is very situational? Because you're talking about a wide utility level, and I'm struggling to wrap my head around why that would be, unless you had to have very pinpoint specific cards for different situations, and it's that kind of gives you the, okay, sometimes you're weak in this regard, strong in this regard. Am I on the right path of understanding?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Because in that blocking process, like where you're matching stealth to intercept, you never know, how much. Let's say your opponents don't know how much stealth you have, and you don't know how much intercept they're going to have. And if you've got more stealth than them, you just reveal one card at a time. You can sneak past their minions, and you can get to do what you want to do anyway. And inversely, when you're defending yourself, the roles are reversed. You don't know how much stealth your predator is going to have, and they don't know how much intercept you're going to have. And one of the other key cards that, like a staple you put into almost every deck, is a card that lets a minion unlock, or lets a minion behave as if they are unlocked in the moment. So you can have, say, 5 minions, and they're all locked, and it looks like you're undefended and that you're open to attack, and your predator will go, aha, that's an opportunity, I'm going to take that opportunity. And then in response, you play a card from your hand that says, oh, one of them wakes up. Oh, okay. So now they can block. Now they can intercept. Now they can fight, and so their plans are foiled. And while everybody expects a player to have some of those cards, you can only have so many of them, a finite number of them, and you never know whether they when it's your turn whether they've got those cards in their hand or not. And that's where that bluffing and sort of social interplay comes in, because you can announce to say, don't try that because I've got this, and you can say whatever you like about what your capabilities are. You don't have to be truthful, and so yeah, that's where the negotiation and the bluffing and the arguing sort of comes in.
So you might be just straight up telling people, oh, don't attack me, I've got this. Oh, attack this other person because they're your predator, so that will be good for you.
And there's a psychological thing as well about demonstrating what your deck of cards is capable of. So if you have intercepted before, if you have woken before, if your minions have fought before and you've won that fight and you've done something, and you've really hurt one of their minions, you can say, well, my deck has already done this. I have these cards in my hand. I can do it again. I've got them right now. You want to find out?
Now, as always, I want to remind everyone in the audience to please feel free to comment, ask questions. That's the main reason why I do these things live. And I've got a bunch of things that I'm going to ask. And honestly, I'm having mic on because I want to learn, but hopefully I see there's a whole bunch of people watching, and hopefully it's useful to you as well. One thing that you touched upon is the elimination. You want to kill the person to your left.
Yep.
And is there a possibility that I'm just going to be eliminated halfway through and then I've just got to sit around for the evening and I'm feeling a bit sad?
That's always a potential consequence of any player elimination style game, and I think it's one of the reasons why VTES has always remained not quite a sort of a cult game, a cult activity, but certainly not. It never broke the mainstream in the same way Magic has done, and I think it's partly because of A, the time it takes to play the game, and B, that possibility of elimination. It is played competitively actually, and there are tournament floor rules, and there are organised events that happen in the UK and overseas, where the format is, and it's quite a lengthy format. So you're really putting aside a whole afternoon or a whole day really to play a tournament. An individual game of VTES. In tournament conditions will be timed at 2 hours. So you play the 5 of you for 2 hours, and then whoever scores the points in that round, you just carry that forwards. And you would, depending on how much time you have, you would play at least 2 rounds of games before selecting the top 5 players to play a final. Typically, there would always usually be 3 rounds. Like you would do 3 rounds and then a final. And each round, the table seating is changed so that you're never sitting next to the same people twice. If we can help it, depending on how many people are playing total. And then, the winners go through to a final, and then the top scoring player in the final is the ultimate winner, the ultimate player. And in a tournament, they will usually win some sort of prize, a bit of artwork or some cards or something. There's
it sounds like, yeah, I can imagine that being a real all-day thing, like an 8-hour event. You talked about 3 qualifying rounds typically, and then this final, which I imagine at that point, if you're not in the final, you might be watching from the sidelines, and a lot of people
it's
spectating.
A lot of people do spectate, and with big national events, often it's recorded or streamed live, and people can watch the videos of them, and so because you're getting to see the player interactions as well as just the game itself mechanically being played. And sort of go back to your point about what do you do if you're knocked out early? Well, because it's a social game, and the players are usually very social. You just chat, you just hang about. If there's enough of you, maybe you start a little game on the side, like another game on the side with the people that you can collect that are left over. In a big tournament, when a final is taking place, often there'll be other friendly games happening at the same time with other players that are left over.
So if you're the first eliminated, the expectation is that either you'll be watching or you'll have like something to read or fiddle with, or potentially whatever.
Yeah, or you go to one side and chat with the other people that have already died. Yeah.
So yeah, it does seem like, let's talk about the negatives. I mean, player elimination, as you say, is a big one that I think for lots of modern board gamers, it's completely unpalatable. And I can understand why. There's a desire to be involved at every stage. There's a desire for turns to start taking shorter and shorter amounts of time, and for it to be simultaneous action with, something like, I don't know, Race for the Galaxy, where everyone plays at once, and then boom, everyone resolves at once, rather than even taking turns over things. And so, by contrast, something like VTES is very old school, and it does sound like it demands a different style of thinking, where when it's not your turn, you are negotiating with the other players. How much is it all table chat about the game, or is there typically table chat about real life and other events along the way? Like if it's a 5-player game and the person directly opposite you is taking their turn.
Yeah, I mean, if there are things going on the table that don't involve you, you can happily chat with the players next to you about other stuff not related to the game. Yeah, sure. And then again, because the game attracts quite social players, that does tend to happen. Or, but also because what other people are doing is quite interesting in terms of how it affects the overall table and the game state. Is you're often quite paying attention to that, or commentating on that, or even offering suggestions. Like my 2 allies across the table, well, one of them might go, well, I'm not quite sure what to do this turn, and then you can say, well, why don't you do this, or what you could help me by doing this, or have you thought about this? And because you want them to do well in this moment, you want to be giving them the best advice you can. So that happens a lot as well. But you're right. It's I mean the game was originally designed in the 90s, informed by what we knew about sort of card games at the time, and Garfield obviously is a bit of a genius. He's and to be able to knock out Magic and then Netrunner and then this in a row, I mean, those are all great achievements. I mean, I think any game designer would be proud to be able to create something similar. But yeah, the way the players interact and the way that you've always got the opportunity to respond to what's happening means it has to be sequential. It has to be, I do this, then somebody does that. I do this, somebody does that. It has to be simultaneous play. Would
Hmm.
completely deconstruct the game. It wouldn't be
And
playable
with
in
the
the same way.
instance, to
Um,
use the Magic the Gathering parlance, with card effects that you can play on anyone's turn, presumably that might be things that you even interrupt the game when it's your ally's turn to help
Yeah,
boost
yeah,
their
yeah.
effect.
There are out of turn game opportunities. Yeah, there are sort of these green Mastercards which you can potentially play out of turn when it's not your turn. Also, when anybody does a political action, which is your vampire basically calls a vote for something to happen, and the terms of what happens is on the card that you play out of your hand. But then it goes to everybody around the table. Everyone's got and you look at the titles on your vampires, because that's so again taken from Vampire the Masquerade. You might have princes or primogen or archbishops, and those are all turn into votes, which are only counted in those political actions. And everybody around the table gets to vote with their minions, regardless of whose turn it is. If I call the vote, everyone on the table votes, and again, that's where some negotiation can come in, because it's, well, maybe the terms are good for one or more players, so I can decide which players that benefit from it. So I'll say, well, my ally across the table, I see you have a few votes, so I will share the benefits of this
But
card with you if you vote
conversely,
for
if
me.
your predator is about to die, then your ally to your right might be about to become your new predator, correct?
Yeah, yeah, going to the left. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Like,
the second person
because the
around the
person.
table who was my ally, yeah, is about to become my new prey. So that's when that relationship starts to flip. They're like, well, I don't want to cooperate with you anymore, because I want. They want to score their point. They don't want me to score my point. They want to score their point. So then that's when things start to change, and where you might start to do more cross-table things to try and, yeah, mitigate other people scoring. but
Mhm.
but but also one of the adages that a lot of experienced players um, believe in is that the game only really starts when the first player dies. That the first part of the game is really just set up. It's really just foreplay, and then somebody needs to die for the real game to kick in.
Wow.
And to an extent, it doesn't matter too much who that is, as long as it isn't you, because you've still got a chance to score the rest of those points. You just need the breathing space to set yourself up to do that.
And when you're playing a one-off game, presumably it's just if you're the last person in the game, you are the winner. And
It's not actually that straightforward, because you earn a point for being the last person standing, but it may be like in a 5-player game that somebody else has killed 3 players and then you killed them, and so they scored 3 points, and you only scored 2. So actually,
okay, so it's
they
one
they
point
are
per
still the
each
winner.
time you kill your prey,
Yeah.
1 point for being the last person standing, and that's it.
Yeah. And the idea in tournament conditions is whoever, if somebody scores the most points and at least half the points on the table, they earn a game win, which affects the way people are ranked in terms of who's going through. But you can be the situation where you were the last player in, but actually you didn't win because somebody else got more points than you.
Oh, interesting. So it seems like the last player is likely but not guaranteed to be the winner,
Yeah.
and it is still it's that kind of bloody combat of I'm going to take you down, I'm going to reduce your life points, but now with the interaction. And again, it feels like a game that I really need to get to go of
Sure.
before I
Sure.
leave. And for you're based in London, not too far from me. I mean, not a million miles away. I mean, not even 1,000 miles away. Not even 100. Well, um, but yes, if you run this monthly thing, I would like to talk a little bit about your personal relationship with VTES and how you found it and everything. And hello, Rob, who says, I think I can guess some of the recent discussion. Um, but yes, if people want to play with you or with other people, how would and are based in London, I mean, how would they go about it? And if they're based somewhere completely different, like, I don't know, California or Abuja, Nigeria, or Bangkok, or, there's other places in the world, Paris. I can keep naming cities. I can do this all day. It's not very interesting. But yeah, how would you recommend that?
Yeah, I mean, there are communities all over the place that are still playing, and meet to play socially or competitively. There's a whole bunch of Facebook groups. If you search Facebook groups for VTES, you'll find loads of sort of local community groups that you can join. I think there's links on the Black Chantry website, the company who now produces it, on the VKN website. The Vampire Elder Kindred Network is kind of like the official fan organization that supports the game, and through that website you can get to, there are forums where you can ask questions and search for people as well. I'm sure there are Reddits and other places you can go as well to sort of find people. Instagram. the I've been playing for pretty much since the game came out, and there was a period where I moved from just being a player to kind of being more involved in the community, and sort of became sort of the again representative for London, running tournaments and events here. With and was did that very actively for quite a long time. Not so actively these days because real life. I'm kind of having to juggle. So I've got spare time game design stuff that's actually not related to VTES at all. So there's always a bit of a trade off there. But so, yeah, we're currently meeting once a month on a Wednesday night in a pub in London, and people are welcome to join us to play. Yeah, it's open. Yeah, we're not. We try not to be too worried about what people's backgrounds are, what people's experience are with the game. We can lend decks to people to play with if it's really necessary. And there's some guys up north. The VTES in the UK is probably mostly active in the Midlands at the moment. There's a lot of players that are playing all the time in the Midlands. Most of
Yeah,
the
it does
tournaments are in
seem
Leeds
like
or Liverpool right now.
it does seem like the requirement for a higher player count is another slight shortcoming of the game, something that's maybe going to stop it from spreading in whatever way. And in a sense, it's both a benefit for a game because people are incentivized to keep asking more people to join and are motivated to say, hey, join our group. Because then we'd rather have a 6-player or 7-player game than just a 4-player game. But
Yeah,
on the other hand, if you are in a place where not many people are playing, it's not just a case of, okay, I'll buy something and I'll talk 1 or 2 people into playing it to get the full impact. You've got to get 4 people to really invest, by which I don't mean financially necessarily, but at least emotionally in terms of spending the time to get to know the game before you're really playing the full experience.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, 3 players is enough. I mean, 5 players is optimal, but 3 players is enough. But yeah, I mean, you are right that if it's just you, if you don't know any other players, so obviously it's going to be a struggle to play it properly. But then hopefully it shouldn't be that. Like most gamers know other gamers. It shouldn't be that hard
Mhm.
to find people to play. Even if it's going to a games cafe or a games meet or a convention, you should be able to find people that are willing to play with you. You know, just stick up a flag and away you go. And what we try to do is with the new 5th edition core set of VTES is there's 5 decks in the box ready to play that are already in a quite a playable state. The what used to happen back in the day, or back when Wizards produced it, was the the original decks were completely randomized, so they weren't really that playable. You had to curate your own collection quite a bit before you could start making decks that would work well. Whereas our philosophy now is that any deck you buy, you could take to a tournament and it would do just fine. It's quite playable out of the box. So somebody buys that 5th edition box. All you need to do is find 2 to 4 other players to play it with you. Everything you need is in that box. It's certainly the easiest way in that it's ever been to get into it. But But it sort of circles back to one of the questions you asked before about why is the game still alive? You know, why do people still just how is it managed to perpetuate itself? And I think it's partly linked to that idea of, because I can only play it in a multiplayer, and because I always need other people to play it with me. If I'm excited about this game, I'm going to go out there and try and make as many other people excited about this game as I can, and it kind of spreads like not like wildfire, but certainly through word of mouth, through social connections. You teach one person, who then teaches another person, who then teaches another person, and organically, the community just keeps going.
I mean, when you compare it to an abstract strategy game, for example, a two-player thing, I think that those are actually benefited when you've got people of equal skill. And I think those work perfectly when I've got a regular partner and we don't need to play with anyone else, really. This can be our little game. I mean, Hive, Pelago, whatever. I mean, these are all wonderful games and I adore them. And I've talked about them for probably hundreds of hours. But I think the key thing is that with the high interaction, you can have a newcomer come in and probably they're not going to be, I'm assuming that they are actually less likely to be the first person killed, just because people are going to be like, okay, well, um, anyone can die, and we're not just going to pick on them because they're weak. I'm still going to pick on the person to my left, and you've still got your two allies to help guide you and to tell you what to do. And so everything comes together because of this true semi-cooperative nature, these temporary alliances, as you say. Um, Rob says, I used to work in a games shop in the late 90s, spent some of the slack time throwing together playable commons VTES decks for demo purposes. Some of them actually worked okay, but would never win a proper game. And, Jane Garvani is just giving a shout out to someone else. But hello,
Yeah.
Jane, and hope you're generally well. And hello, Xate. I hope you're generally well as well.
I mean, if you're new to playing, the structure of the way the game is played is going to assist you. That not everyone can just attack you randomly, and yeah, you're right. The allies across table can potentially help you and coach you. Yeah, that's mitigating your level of experience. You might still end up being the first person out, but you should have learned quite a lot in the process. You should still have enjoyed playing the game. Generally speaking, the VTES players I know are generally very good at being accommodating and explaining themselves and announcing what they're doing, and sort of accommodating people that don't know the rules so well.
You've got some love from Xate. But I would like to touch upon the history a little bit about the history of the game. Started off from Wizards of the Coast, who's now been, well, grew into a bigger company, ended up buying TSR and Dungeons and Dragons, and
best not to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, given what's been happening this week. But
got bought themselves by Hasbro, like they've been subsumed, let's say, and then it was essentially bought by White Wolf and then again dropped. And currently, as you said, Black Chandri Productions is hosting the game. And why do you think this is? Hello, Yoda. I hope you're well. But why do you think it's gone through so many people?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on the inside in terms of why those decisions were made, but yeah, you're right. The Wizards originally made the first version of the game. Wizards and White Wolf, who owned the Vampire IP, were quite close back in the 90s. They would like put these big stands together next to each other in Gen Con US and throw parties and stuff. And I guess just by talking, the idea came up of doing a game together. But I think the reality of the sales from Wizards' perspective just weren't enough to say. I don't think they'd expected that Magic would explode as big as it did, and they needed to focus on Magic more than anything else.
Mm-mm.
And actually, and VTES wasn't the only game to get cut in the process. Like
Yeah.
Netrunner also did get dropped. Some of the other games that they produced as well also got dropped. It was only Magic really that survived the cull
There's still a
in the long
lots of
run.
love for BattleTech and even Xena and some of the
Did they
other,
do it? Was it them that did a Shadowrun one as well? I can't remember who it was, but yeah, there was a lot of other games that didn't make the
like
when
Deckmaster
the
was meant to be a big range, a brand of
yeah
quality. That's why
the
it's got this kind of superfluous
yeah
text on the back of the
when the
card.
CCG bubble burst, yeah, there were a lot of casualties, and not just VTES, and but because this community of people playing it competitively and socially all over the place had already been established, so people just kept playing. There was this sense of, well, there are enough cards that have been produced already to make the game viable, to make the game work, and people just keep playing with those cards. And because with that social element, you play socially, you interact socially before and after the games, people just kept playing. They just didn't stop playing. And when White Wolf saw that, not like over, I think it's like 4 or 5 years later, people were still playing the game and refusing to give up on it. They decided, well, let's do it ourselves. Let's service this community that have been playing it so loyally by reproducing the game and reprinting the game, producing new content for the game to support these fans that are just clearly really into it and really loyal. And so yeah, so they took that forwards. Yeah, and it was in print again, but in the noughties, where a lot of publishers were starting to feel the crunch of the tide was turning with not just gaming, not just card games, but with print publishing generally. I mean, White Wolf and many of the other players in the industry were starting to struggle with people not buying books and it not being cost effective to keep making certain products. I think there was quite a pragmatic decision that VTES, in terms of their agenda, was again, they had to prioritize. They couldn't sustain it, so they had to stop. It wasn't because they didn't want to serve the fans. When actually I was in New Orleans at their first sort of big masquerade event in New Orleans, where they actually made this announcement. So there was a VTES tournament there. There was LARPing there as well, and tabletop role playing. But that they actually made the announcement there that they weren't going to continue the VTES game, and it was just a bit sad for us players that were there attending the event. But we could kind of see what was happening, and and the reality was a few years after that, White Wolf actually sold up and sold all their IP onto CCP because of the financial situation they're in. It was
So at this point, Black Chantry, do they own the rights to all the previous artwork and rules and everything that's been made for the game?
Yeah, well, cut to now. There was another big period of players just playing it themselves, even though it wasn't being officially produced, until the same situation happened again. Players are still playing, people still love the game, the community was still going. So eventually, Black Chantry have come in basically to do what White Wolf did before: reinvigorate the game, reproduce the game for the benefit of that community. In terms of the artwork, the way that White Wolf has always worked, and Paradox now, who have basically inherited the same IP and the same contracts, is when an artist does a piece of art for any part of the World of Darkness, usually that rights to use that artwork is given in perpetuity to them as the IP holder. So if there's a piece of art shown in a vampire role-playing book, that's a piece of art that belongs to Paradox now, effectively. And if we make a piece of art for a card, that also belongs to Paradox. But what that also means is they are sitting on this huge library of artwork that have been made by different people over the years, which can potentially be reused and or sort of recontextualized for different purposes. And there's a lot of cross-pollination between.
But presumably with CCG art, I mean, well, I know it's not a collectible card game, but with card game art, you don't want to reuse art that's been used on an old card for something different.
Yeah. We we have reused art for cards where it was printed before, like White Wolf made a card with artwork on it, and we've still had access to that art and been able to reuse that art, so we haven't had to create a new one. But for a lot of cards, we have actually refreshed the artwork. The actually Paradox's standards for what is considered good art is a lot higher than what White Wolves used to be. So that there are some cards where it was necessary to refresh them, and of course
Mm-mm,
we want to make new cards as well as just printing old cards. And every new card needs new artwork, and actually, and that's a non-trivial cost when it comes to making a
mm-mm.
card game like this. Is every new card that you make needs a new piece of artwork. That's where most of the money goes.
And
To be
these
honest,
aren't just like quick scribbles like what I'm happy to have on my games, with all due
um,
respect to me.
no, I
um,
mean every card picture is itself potentially a proper work of art that an artist has sunk quite a bit of time into, and actually a lot of the artists that we work with now, there is a bit of trade on the side of they do prints and postcards of the artwork that they've done for the game. Although they don't own the original anymore, they usually have the rights to sell their own copies. Yeah, and the standard that we've been able to enforce, or that actually Inez, our art director, has been able to enforce, is incredible. These some of the works are great. And the originals, where they are available for sale, they usually go for thousands of dollars.
and
Um,
what would so who are these people? It seems from reading that this is basically a bunch of super fans, some of whom were involved in the game pretty much since it came out, who just are doing this because of an emotional investment rather than. I mean, I hope that are making a bit of money for their time, but it feels like it's very much emotionally motivated. Is that broadly correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I mean, what we were trying to do, when I say we as a community of sort of active players and organisers, was we were trying to find another publishing company who'd be willing to make VTES. That was what we were trying to do for a while, and unfortunately weren't really getting. We came close a couple of times, but nothing really came of it, and so. Some people, some leaders in the community were just like, well, let's just do it ourselves. My friend Hugh, who lives in Nottingham, was just took the bullet and was like, well, I will be the instigator, I will be the organizer, I'll register the company, and then it's who else wants to join me. Actually, I got an invitation to be officially part of the company too, but I declined because I could only give it so much time, and also everybody had to put a bit of money in to get it started. And my proposition to them was, I'll just work for you as a freelancer when you need me. Otherwise, I'll be getting on with other projects. But yeah, essentially they were all super fans. They were all emotionally invested in the game, wanted it to continue, and were willing to put money and time into making that happen.
So, I'd like to talk to you about this thing, the Fall of London, which is a relatively small number of cards. It's not enough to make a bunch of decks. It's not a standalone product, and this is meant to be something to add to your existing collection. Can you talk a little bit about this, where you were the lead designer, and what that's involved, and who this is aimed at, really?
Sure, yeah. It's as a VTES set, as a supplementary set for VTES, the Fall of London's a bit of an experiment by us collectively on the Black Chantry side, um, to just to explore the story of the universe a bit more than we did previously. The one thing that there's always been uh, in the card design of VTES from its very early days is always trading off um, the narrative of the Vampire the Masquerade universe against the sort of the mechanical competitive nature of the pure VTES game itself. And some people are drawn to the game because they want to understand its mechanics, and they want to go to tournaments, they want to win tournaments and score points. Some people play VTES much more for the emergent narrative that happens in individual games, like and when you meet other VTES players, you always get these stories come out of, well, I played this game on this date at this place where this happened, this vampire did this thing, and this guy reacted in this way. And with drastic consequences or hilarious consequences, and you get all these little anecdotes around the game all the time. And some people come to the card game because they are also role players. They also played the Masquerade Tabletop or the Masquerade LARP, so they get quite you get quite emotionally invested in, I know this character and I know their story, so I want to play this character, I want to bring this card out, and I know all about them and I want them to do well, and they're sort of coming in from it from that kind of perspective. So the some of the sets and the decks that we've made with Black Chantry have been much more focused on just balancing the game, addressing the competitive nature of the game, whereas this set is much more about acknowledging the story of Vampire 5th edition, and it's partly because I was a writer for the Fall of London book that was made for the role playing game for Vampire Masquerade 5th edition. I was one of 5 writers that actually made content. So a lot of these characters that you're seeing as cards, actually I wrote and created them for the first time in the role playing game. So we get to cross over and sort of and that story becomes shared and hopefully maybe encourages more of our card players to look at the role-playing game, or to look at some of the other licensed properties related to Vampire the Masquerade.
And
that's something
vice versa, or do all the role players already? I mean, it's already like 90% of them played the card game.
Yeah, I mean, and I think from Paradox's perspective, who are now the owners of this IP, this World of Darkness Vampire the Masquerade IP, they're very keen to not just encourage the different fan communities around their licensed products, but to encourage sort of bleed crossover between them as well. They want people to experience the many different facets of the IP. They want it to be one shared universe. They want it to be one shared story. They want it to be supports to have continuity, to have it kind of support each other. We're in negotiations with there's a couple of computer games that have been made in the same universe, and we've been talking about making a few cards to represent some characters from one of those computer games. So I'm working on. I contributed material for the chapters Vampire the Masquerade board game being released by Flyos, a Canadian company that should be out very soon. And I've got this new project too as well. So hopefully we'll make cards that cross over with those as well. And there is talk that maybe someday there'll be World of Darkness, maybe TV shows or something. So maybe we'll make cards for that too. We'll have to wait and see. But
so talking about why it's continued and why fans have kept bringing it up, it feels like maybe that's part of the reason, because there is this attraction from multiple sides. If you are really into this, and I understand the RPG, it pushes for a LARP experience, but it can also be a tabletop role-playing game, so you can play it either way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
I mean, I've played it back in the day, and whilst I imagine a lot of those players aren't necessarily playing VTES, it's going to be at least something that are more inclined to try than Battletech, although Battletech's
sure.
You know what I mean?
Like, I mean, there used to be there used to be a lot of Vampire LARP events in London, and I used to go to some of them. And what would happen before the LARP started? Like, people would gather early, and some people would sit in the corner and play VTES beforehand, and that's just another activity that they would do, and they would only play it with the other LARPers. They wouldn't necessarily go to tournaments or anything. They just played it between themselves. But it was, I guess, another way of celebrating the same universe.
And that's another way that it could spread. Someone might turn up just before the LARP was about to start and say, "Hey, you're just packing up this game. What is this game that you've been playing?" And then get introduced to it that way. Now, it's been an hour and we've chatted about so much. It's been a brilliant chat. At this point, is there anything else that you would like to tell everyone about VTES the way it is now, and something to encourage them to give it a try, or indeed how you would encourage people to give it a try?
Well, it's Yeah, well, hopefully I've expressed some of my passion for the game. There's lots of other people out there that feel similarly. It shouldn't be that hard to find them. As I say, and if you're based in the UK, you're based in London, yeah, I can potentially put you in touch with people who play. Yeah, you're. I'm not sure which game stores are stocking the new VTES now. I think Leisure Games should have some. I know that Patriot Games in Leeds have some because that's where a lot of the events take place. Or you can find them online. One of the other things we've done actually is made cards available through drive-through cards as well as a print-on-demand. So if you can't find a store, you can't find anywhere to buy physical products, you can go to drive-through cards online and you can select either packs or either individual cards. Just buy what you want and they'll print them and ship them straight to you. So yeah, the game's from a commercial standpoint, the game's never been more accessible than it has been now.
That's amazing because I don't know. I had this misunderstanding that it was this big thing that, you know, and maybe there's this myth that's propagated that, hey, it was just dropped and it's this that. And it is kind of sad, I get that, for people who are playing it. But the reason is that not enough people are playing it or buying it for it to be a commercial venture for to keep White Wolf alive or to be a mainstay in the Wizards of the Coast lineup.
Well,
And but yeah, when you compare it to Magic the Gathering, you know, nothing's really going to compare to the literally the biggest grossing non-digital game in the world. Well, yeah, I think the non-digital side branch of Magic the Gathering is still the biggest grossing
yeah.
non-digital
Well,
gaming
there's
product in the world.
well, there's an element to this story which is that more broadly speaking, I mean, not just for VTES particularly, but within the tabletop industry, if a game isn't reprinted, if a game isn't sold a huge amount, that doesn't mean that it's a bad game. That doesn't necessarily mean that that it hasn't got an audience. It's just that from the publisher's point of view, that it just might not be. It just you can only prioritize so many projects, and the thing with any card game like this, where there's a community, is that you have to sink time as the producer of the game into building that community, and that community doesn't exist at the beginning. You have to go out and build that community. Wizards and White Wolf were very successful in doing that in the very early days of VTES, which is where we're kind of this situation where we are now, where it's perpetuated itself. But many other games, either people didn't understand the amount of time and money they had to put into that community side of things, or they just refused to do it. I mean, that's essentially why the CCG bubble burst in the end of the 90s, was this like the hammer drops, like this cold hard reality came to all these publishers of, well, if we want these games to work, we need to put in how much money and how much time just creating promo cards and just engaging with players on forums and just organizing events and not actually making and selling products. No, we're not going. No, we don't. That's not a business model that's sustainable, and hence, bang, all these games got dropped, and very good games as well. Like Doomtown was a great game. That's the other game that I used to play. Say Netrunner got dropped as well. I think Legend of the Five Rings has been through a similar sort of cycle of being alive and being dead. There's a lot of very good games that did find their audiences that have struggled because of this core requirement to serve that community.
You know, organized play, as you say, is something that takes time and focus and money, and you need to kind of be able to afford to say, okay, this is someone and this is their job. Their job is to curate this, and so you do need to invest into being able to continue making it. I mean, yeah, it is difficult. And one thing we didn't really talk about is the broader lessons as a designer, as you know, people who are interested in the creation of games. I would love to, if possible, continue this conversation maybe after I've had a chance to actually play a game or two myself, and we can have a more in depth, well considered conversation about the specifics of some of the cards and how they came to be, and some of the thoughts that went into some of your specific design decisions, if that sounds okay.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
No problem at all.
I would, but in as a teaser for that, what would you say are your some of your biggest lessons from working with the VTES property?
Um, I'm not sure about specific lessons. I mean, the
I mean, that's the truth. Like
it's a
sometimes,
unique it's a unique proposition in terms of designing a game. Like if you make a self-contained board game, even if it's got cards in it, maybe it's 50 cards, maybe it's 100 cards. The you only need to think about the interactions of those components between themselves. That's quite a contained little sort of design ecosystem and quite manageable. For BTES, one of the tenets when Black Chantry picked it up again was we still need to keep as many cards that were ever printed before, even the original brown jihad backed ones from 1994. We still need to keep as many of those playable as possible in today's game environment, which means that every single card that you make now, you need to think about the potential interactions with thousands of unique cards that have already been printed, which is
over
a much
3,600, as it says on their websites.
which is a much bigger challenge. Yeah, so we have to be very careful about about that and not breaking the game in the process. And we've done pretty well so far. We've got with this. I think there's only one, maybe two cards that we printed as Black Chantry, which have caused us eyebrows to be raised and a bit of controversy. What we rely on very heavily is playtest feedback. Like any game needs to be playtested, but this game really needs to be play tested, and we do rely
That's
on
a mind-boggling number of things, and given that the main way the game is played is legacy, and yeah, are how frequent are bannings or restrictions or modifications of like given tournament feedback, if you know what I mean?
There haven't really been many bannings at all. There's there was in the White Wolf era there was something like 7 cards that were banned. I'm just trying to think now. Is it at the end of the Wizards era? There were 7 cards that were banned, and 2 of those were to do with anti, because we didn't want them
Yeah,
played
so that's
in tournament
down to
conditions.
the way they want the game to be
Um,
played rather than anything to do with playability.
and
Wow.
there's been a handful since, but yeah, we've really tried to avoid doing that. What has happened much more is errata, and with and certainly with the Black Chantry edition of the game, there's been the opportunity to do a sweep. And an errata a few cards when they're reprinted, and so everybody playing any copy of the card just has to adopt the new version that was printed. Actually, what's happened is there's been a lot of sweep with language and terminology. So cards haven't changed in terms of how they work mechanically, but how they are worded has been cleaned up a little bit in a lot of cases, just to make things super clear. Because we have to bear in mind that the majority of VTES players are actually foreign nationals where English is not their first language. And actually, we have started printing other languages too. In fact, you can get a set in Latin if you wanted to. That might appeal to you. You could have a VTES deck made printed in Latin.
What? And that, I mean, there's a lot of philosophical questions about errata versus banning versus and like restrictions and what should be available, but I think it's time for me to turn the tables slightly. I've asked you
Mhm.
lots of questions, and at this point, Mike, what's a question that you would like to ask me and potentially anyone watching? So, what would you like to ask as the question of the day? Question of the day. It's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day. My
Hmm.
God.
Well, well, I guess just following the theme of today's conversation, if you were going to make, or if you had the opportunity to make a competitive, constructible card game of some kind where people made their own decks, what would you base it around? What kind of game would that be if Bez was to make it?
Mm. I mean, this is interesting because this is something that I've been pondering
Hmm.
because I feel like most deck construction games are they've got a very high barrier financially, and that's the main thing that bothers me. I really like limited play actually. I really like the idea of, hey, let's go and pay a bit of money, and then you're kind of on an equal footing with other people. Sure, they've got more experience. Sure, they might have studied things in like some pre-release notes or whatever, but fundamentally, you've got access to the same, well, not the same pieces because people there'll be randomness in what the booster packs. But I would
Well,
actually
randomness and collectability are separate propositions from the
that's true.
constructible
Yes.
process.
Okay,
Um,
talking about typical limited structures. Typically, in a limited format, people do start with asymmetric card pools, but I don't think there's been much exploration of limited formats where everyone just starts with the same card pool, and it's like, okay, with these whatever number of cards, you've got to choose around 40% of them and make your deck. And your challenge is to find the best synergies, to evaluate the powers. I mean, that's like from a broad business perspective, I would prioritize like something where you can pay like a tenner and then have a decent experience of a limited experience of playing for a few hours. Um,
well, I guess
Yeah,
Keyforge did
honestly,
something like
the
that.
question of what do you theme it around, that's a bigger question. And so my thoughts, because again, this is something that I've been pondering, what I was thinking was of having domino shaped cards, so a 2-by-1 ratio, where
Mhm.
you can potentially tuck one square under other cards to sort of expand them. So each card is modular, so you can either have it as a base piece if both sides are the same, or if they are different, you'll either tuck it under like a creature to expand this morphing creature that expands its neck or whatever, or expand it under this other thing to expand a gizmo for whatever reason. And
Mhm.
it's by modularizing the way that cards can be put together, it feels like you could get even more variability with a smaller card pool. But for sure, the challenge is in any deck construction game, like constructed deck game. I like your term because people hear deck construction game and they think deck building, even that though that's completely different. I think that the organized play that's already been mentioned is so important. The truth is, in terms of theme, I don't get as excited by other people by themes that like other people get excited by. Oh, it's birds. Oh, it's vampires. Oh, I actually like the idea of zombies, but then we're all together. I mean, Dead of Winter is a great game where it's focusing on the humans and the relationships rather than the zombies. But to me, that's evoked by the mechanisms, by the and in terms of a theme, it would be interesting to have something that's not just about bloody combat, like
Mhm.
something where it's about like a constructed deck game. I'm going to start using that forever now. About building a dream palace or building a kingdom in the clouds, or um, but then where battling does really give you a strong motivation for interaction. If you're all building stuff, then where's the interaction? Why are you playing with all these people across the table from you? And that's
Yep.
the core question. I did really like Huntic, where it's got a little bit of a board, your pieces are moving around, and with the central map, one person's got to find this thing and retrieve it and bring it back. The other person's got to stop them getting there. And if the person goes and retrieves it, they've almost won. But you've got one last ditch attempt to maybe run in with someone who's got fast movement. Again, represented by cards on this
Mhm.
single one-dimensional board, which only has like 5 or 7 spaces. I can't remember. So it's not like a big board, but that little bit of movement really adds so much to the game. And I think
Yep,
it
yep.
is actually very challenging, as much as I think magical combat is kind of a cop out mechanism, but I think it works really well because then you can make sense of literally any mechanism. I mean, sorry, not a cop out mechanism, a cop out theme. I misspoke. But it's something that allows you to do whatever you want within that play space. Hey, you don't understand how that happens? Well, wizards did it. Hey, you don't understand why you're playing against the other person? Well, you're fighting together. Whereas something where it's okay, you are playing as people talking to someone and trying to help them evoke their dreams. That
Mhm.
sounds fascinating, but it's not very concrete. And I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to do. That's and why am I playing with other people? And I think that's the challenge for most game themes that aren't about combat, frankly. Why are you even playing with these other people? And how does that tie in with the theme?
Yeah, it's some yeah. I'm a very theme-driven designer myself, yeah, and I do sometimes have this weird cognitive dissonance for games where it's like particularly very dry Euro games, and it's like, well, why is this happening? Why do I care about this happening? And yeah, I can move this, I can push this track, or I can move this cube, I can, yeah, tick things off an abacus or whatever, and it's like, yeah, yeah, great, but that's just that abstraction just does not appeal to me at all. It's like, if I don't care about doing this, then why do I care about the game at all? It's why would I play it again? Why would I want to introduce this to other players, other people that play games, and particularly people that aren't interested in the design process, like more casual gamers, I think as well, also are drawn to games partly through the theme and partly through the way the theme is used to express what objectives are and what their sort of their options are and their priorities are. If that's not communicated through the material, it can be very dry and very very hard and very not fun for people.
I mean, look at Hey, That's My Fish, which, if you play it at two players, once you've set up the game, it is a perfect information abstract strategy game. But sure, the movement doesn't quite make sense for penguins. I mean, I thought that penguins were able to walk through water, well, not walk through water, but dive in and get out. So why can't they go through water? And why do they have to go in a straight line? That's a bit weird that you can go all the way to the other side of the board, but you can't just move two spaces. But
But it's also a
the
very
aspect of I'm grabbing my fish, that's the one part that makes sense. And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
something that does, I understand, bring it to light for people who might not just want it to be cubes that are collecting tiles with dots on them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and in the new edition, you get they're actually little penguin meeples, aren't they? They're like, so they look like penguins. Yeah, but it's a very short game. It's a family game. It's a very quick game to play. It doesn't overstay its welcome. So I think there is a well, for me personally, there's a trade-off in terms of my expectations. If it only takes 15 minutes to play, I'm not going to give it a hard time for being super perfect in terms of the way the theme meshes with the rules. But if it's a 2 to 3 hour like more epic experience, so then I've got much higher expectations in terms of how that should work.
We've covered so much, but like at this point, we have to leave and let's talk about what we're up to. Over to you, over to you. What's your up to? How does this song go again? This is terrible. Over to you. What are you up to? You can share what's on it if you want to. There we go. That's the first time I've ever forgotten that song. I've only done it 800 and times. But yes, what are you up to? What do you want to share? Is there something you need to do? Something you want to do? Please share. I promise I care. There's some emails and stuff that I have to send off. I'll be doing that late tonight. I'm also got to personal appointments at 5:30. In the interim, I'm going to do a tiny bit of tidying up and a lot of vegetable chopping, arranging for one of my neighbours to come over and one of my lovely friends who I used to live with come over for lunch, and we'll play a few probably lighter games and eat some food. And that's going to be the bulk of my day. How about you, Mike? How about everyone else? What's you up to?
This weekend, I'm probably going to work on some game design stuff. I'm going to bake some banana bread. I am going to go this evening to see a pantomime.
Ooh.
My fiance Vicky, she's in an Amdram group in East London, so they're doing Aladdin, so we're going to see that this evening. Yeah.
That sounds absolutely delightful.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I'm going to recap and wrap up before we finish up. So we talked about VTES and why people love it, the idea that, like, even, yeah, we didn't really get into actually just really quickly on Board Game Geek. It says it's for 2 players minimum. Um, why do you disagree with that? And why does it say it's for 2 players minimum on Board Game Geek?
Well, technically you could play 2 players where it's head to head, but all the fundamentals of the game don't really work that way because the idea is because you're praying to the left, you're attacking to the left, defending to the right. That dynamic doesn't exist when there's just the two of you. It's just there isn't you really want at least a third player to kind of add that dynamism to what's happening. That when you take an action, you're defending against a different person. It gets a kind of the sort of what's known, the known information in the game kind of changes, I guess.
And like, yeah, just for the records, there are still a small number of people who think that it's perfectly fine, but everyone basically agrees it is best at 5. We talked about the notion of the person to the left being the prey, which means the person to your right is your predator, which means that in a 4 or 5 player game, you've got 1 or 2 kind of allies, which are eventually going to turn into your prey or your predator, or potentially both if you're the final 2 players in the game. And the idea of the nature of the game being forcing you to kill, because it's 1 victory point per person that you kill, 1 bonus point for being the last person standing, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win. The drawbacks of having a player elimination game, which does mean that given it's a social game, you can maybe continue watching the match because it might be quite exciting to do so, or you might fiddle for a moment, or once the second person's also out of the game, just chat with them while the game wraps up. The idea of it being all about the secrets in your hand in the crypt, but there's no big asymmetric rules or anything, but the idea of do they have that card? Well, it's in their deck, but do they have it right now? How many? That itself adds enough uncertainty that you can sort of play on that a little bit. You can do a little bit of bluffing.
Well, also, I mean, again, we spoke about how there's thousands of games, thousands of cards in the pool of cards that you can build a deck from. So when you play with a new player for the first time and they bring a new deck to the table, you don't know what's in that deck, what cards they've chosen from that range of cards. That's all something that will only be revealed out of your first game with them.
Sounds really exciting, and I mean, we can talk next time maybe about how making a deck of cards, a set of cards with 3,600 already in the pool is going to be challenging, how to make those things meaningful. We talked about, if you want to get into it, there's Facebook groups. We talked about the genius of Garfield making all these collectible card games, the bubble, the history going from Wizards of the Coast to White Wolf, and now ending up with Black Chantry. People are just super enthusiastic about it. We talked a little bit about the crossover with the Fall of London. That's not just for the cards game, but also parts of the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade. How do you pronounce that, Mike?
Masquerade, yeah.
Masquerade. Okay, thank you. And we talked about how organized play is expensive and that games are good, even, well, not every game is brilliant or even good, frankly, but they can be good even if they're dropped. It's not necessarily about the quality of the game, it's about how much money it's bringing in. And we had a discussion about how few bannings there are and how errata is something that's more jumps upon, and the ownership of art. Rob chimes in with, my favorite thing is that your main resource, blood pool, is also your life. So you can get stronger on the table, but closer to being killed by spending your life points, essentially.
Yep,
And
yep. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we didn't talk about it specifically, but that's another cool thing about the game is that the resource that you use to buy cards is the same resource that if you run out of, you die, and that's what you're trying to protect at the same time. So there's yeah, interesting decisions to make around that.
so if you want to check me out, then I am Stuff by Bez in all of the places. And if you want to check out what I've planned for the future, go to stuffbybez.com/streams, which will also tell you some of the real life things that I will publicly tell you all about, like conventions that I'm planning to go to, which might interact with the streams, which is the reason that I started putting them on there. But it's also useful for to say, hey, I'm going to go to all of these things. If you want to check out Mike Nudd, Mike, where do you like to be found on the internet? You're not super active on social media.
No, I'm pretty terrible at Twitter, and with what's been happening with Twitter as well, I'm even less inclined to use it than I was before. But but yeah, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Board Game Geek. I am on Board Game Geek a lot, just browsing what's going on and stuff. But yeah.
So if someone wants to start having a conversation about Dice Hospital or something else that you've worked on and really wants to interact with you, could they
Yep.
just start a thread and say, "Hey, Mike, I'd love to ask you these questions. Would you respond to it?" I don't
Yeah,
want
if I
to.
can, yeah, no
Okay,
problem.
so you've heard it here. Like Mike Nudd loves chatting to people about their games.
Yeah, well, I do answer questions about like rules questions and stuff about the games. I do usually try and pipe in if I can. Yeah.
I mean, it's always a question of time and whether you even see the thing. But yes, I mean, it's part of the joy, isn't it? Seeing people interact with your things and having people who are passionate about enough to ask stuff is wonderful. Please share, spread the word. Thank you very much, everyone, for being part of the chat. I know there's been a bunch of lurkers, but hopefully you found something of value. And um, yeah, for now, the only what am I actually chatting about tomorrow? Oh yeah, tomorrow I'm going to be heading off to playtest. So I'll actually be chatting, doing a little debrief of my current projects and the nature of making a game based on love using wool. And so for now, lots of love and bye 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye bye everyone.
Goodbye.